Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative and creative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in ranch brokerage and land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work and has an interesting story to tell. My guest today is Christine Sue. Christine is an entrepreneur and CEO of PastureMap, a Silicon Valley startup that creates cutting-edge ranch management software. PastureMap helps ranchers plan grazing, track forage, monitor herd performance, manage record keeping, and much more, all with the goal of saving ranchers time and making their operations more profitable. In the business of ranching, a business that has not changed all that much in the past 100 years, PastureMap is a true breakthrough, and Christine's innovative mindset and infectious enthusiasm are two of the root causes of the company's success. Christine grew up in an entrepreneurial family, and she's had a lifelong curiosity about agriculture and the importance of food production. After building an extremely impressive resume that includes undergraduate and graduate degrees from Stanford, a stint at McKinsey & Company, and expertise in private equity, Christine combined her business expertise with her passion for agriculture and formed PastureMap. PastureMap makes active or holistic management a more realistic option for ranchers, which has ripple effects far beyond the ranchers' bottom lines, including healthier grass, increased biodiversity, stronger communities, and continued viable domestic food production. As you'll hear in our conversation, Christine is a truly dynamic woman whose passion for agriculture is matched by her intellect and entrepreneurial acumen. We discuss all the details of PastureMap and how she built the business from a simple idea into a successful enterprise. We discuss her personal background and why she initially became so curious about agriculture around the world. We also chat about the ins and outs of active ranch management and how a holistic approach to grazing can have far-reaching benefits beyond agriculture. As you'd expect, Christine has plenty of excellent book recommendations related to agriculture, which I know you'll all enjoy. For all you ranchers out there, Christine is offering a 10% off coupon for a year's subscription to PastureMap, and you can claim it by using the code PRAIRIE at the PastureMap website. Check out the episode notes for all the details. But whether you're a rancher or not, I know you'll enjoy this episode. Christine is a perfect example of someone who has merged her passion and expertise into a financially successful business that's making the world a better place. Hope you enjoy.
Yeah, PastureMap is a software platform that helps with grazing management and saves ranchers and their teams time. So it works on iOS, your iPhone or Android, and it also works on your computer. On the mobile phones, it all works offline if you're out in the field, and you can take photos of pre and post grazing. You can plan out moves and have that sync to everybody's phones on your ranch team. You can draw pastures, subdivide them, and then record all the moves. And when you get back into cell reception or back into your office, it all syncs up. So the ranch manager, if they're not out one day checking cattle, they can make sure that the moves that they had planned actually got executed the way that they wanted to. And then on the computer, we have a bunch of bells and whistles that just basically help with grazing management, which is, the cornerstone of a lot of our customers' profitability. So saving time with being able to communicate that grazing plan out to everybody in the field on everyone's phones, and then making sure that that actually happened, and being able to see the photos that that the forage got grazed down to the level it was supposed to. And then we do a bunch of the math that some of the more serious grazers used to spend a lot of time doing, like calculating how many recovery days there are on each pasture. That automatically updates on PastureMap, and you can actually see like a color-coded map of all of your paddocks and which ones have been fully recovered. Obviously, you still have to go out and check before you move critters in, but and then we also calculate everything into animal days per acre, so you know how much you've taken off of each of the pastures, and that all exports out to Excels for reporting to. If you need to report to NRCS or your leaseholder or landowner, we just make the stuff that isn't the fun part of ranching easier.
That's great. And, I work in the ranch brokerage business, and it seems like there is such a huge need for that just hasn't existed. in part because the technology hasn't been there, but now it is. So how did you come up with the idea for this?
Yeah, well, it wasn't my idea. It was a bunch of producers. So my background is I didn't grow up on a ranch. I actually came at it from a consumer. I buy direct from my local farmers and ranchers because I had food allergies, and then started building relationships with the ranchers and the farmers who were my friends. And I used to build software for other companies, like private companies, like manufacturing and sales. And I quit my business career basically to go work as a farmhand on a small family farm and then several others. And I just kept seeing, for those who were serious grazers, I kept seeing these maps on the barn wall with these large grazing charts with highlighter and pen, and like they basically run their whole life off of this. And as someone who has built software for a living, I was like, oh, well, this data is not shareable, right? Like it is 40 years sometimes of somebody's knowledge, and they know every nook and cranny of their property. They understand how different seasons impact the landscape. But as you know, there's a lot of ranchers who are nearing retirement age, and the next generation doesn't have that knowledge base. So how can you pass that knowledge on for the next generation, and also share all of the things that somebody who's really experienced on one piece of land can share that with a wide number of people, like the apprentices and the ranch hands and people who come in for just one day to set up irrigation. It just drove me crazy that wasn't shareable. So that was the idea for Pasture Map.
Very cool. You mentioned one thing. You said you quit your business career to work on a farm. Can you talk a little bit about that? That definitely struck me. I want to hear more about that.
Yeah. So, like I said, I've had food allergies since I was a teenager. And then after college, I went to go work in management consulting, and then later in operations, just for a private equity firm. So what that means is they would send me to random companies that they'd invested in and try to build software to make metrics and numbers more visible to everybody on the front lines. And I really loved that work, but I didn't love just getting thrown into random companies that I didn't particularly have any connection to. And the food system and people who produce our food has always been really meaningful to me. Like I feel like I owe a debt of gratitude to all of the farmers and ranchers in the food system who produce food for all the rest of us living in cities. So basically, I burned out my business career, and I was like, you know what? I actually want to be spending my time, if I'm going to be building tools that are useful for people, I want to build tools that are useful for the people who feed me and my family and my loved ones. So that was when I quit and went and worked on a farm. And then I actually ended up coming back to school and getting an ag degree in land use and agriculture, so I wouldn't seem so ignorant. Although, there's no way that you're going to know as much about the landscape as the guy or gal who's managing it day in and day out. But I wanted to at least, know the front end and back end of a cow.
Be able to speak the language a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got the degree, but also working on farms on 4 different, there's nothing that's more educational than getting out on the land and working on it. So, 6 years later, here I am. Still building tools that help facilitate that knowledge to be passed rather than trying to supplant it or replace it.
Yeah. And so one thing I'm kind of obsessed with is the role that livestock and grasslands can play in just the overall health of the planet. And, I read about it all the time, and I know some folks that are very active in that, and I'm working on some properties that are part of that. And it's just such a interesting concept that a lot of people who are in the environmental world, very well-meaning people, don't seem to understand. And so I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about active grazing and the role that grazing and livestock can play in kind of healing the planet.
Sure. And I feel so strongly about this topic. And I think it's something that every one of us in the, Western Prairie, everybody related to the West landscapes and to ranching need to be talking about this more to people who aren't as connected to land. So It was probably a stroke of fortune that the first farmer that I worked with was an active grazer. So he had a grazing plan, and we rotated animals every few hours. And so I actually just like grew up in this world where managing the health of your animals and managing the health of the land go hand in hand. And I think that's the way that a lot of ranchers I know think about it. And what I didn't know was the science that had shown how much active rotations of grazing for the soil health by bunching animals together around targeted places. And I've seen people manage this in different ways depending on what the goal is for the property. But that can have a tremendous impact in the goals that you want to achieve in bringing back either soil health or bringing back putting more litter cover on the ground. And the carbon sequestration potential of building soil health is like massive. I think if you have gotten your hands on Paul Hawkins' new compilation of the top 100 levers to reverse climate change, it's called Project Drawdown. Managed grazing is, I think, number 19.
Wow.
You know, it's like one of the top 20. And then when you couple that with other things like applying compost on land to turbocharge soil health, or compile that with silvopasture, like selective planting of trees, which in some cases is helpful for providing shade for animals, you can get even bigger benefits. So grazing is a huge lever in reversing climate change. And I think that's something that the livestock manager community is pretty aware of, but in certain circles in the environmental, it's still a message that's getting out there.
When you explain it to someone who doesn't know anything about it, just somebody who is environmentally minded, but maybe has a misconception about livestock, once you take the time to explain it to them and explain how the grass has evolved and how they need to be grazed, you know, et cetera, do they always get it? Because there's a guy that I interviewed a while back named Jim Howell, who you probably know of, and he was one of the co-founders of the Savory Institute, and he lives in Boulder, and he's, you know, preaching this message to people, and that was his experience, that once I can explain it, everybody gets it, but it's just a matter of trying to spread the word as much as I can.
Yeah, and I think the things that are interesting to me and Jim are probably different from what a kind of environmentalist light might from the city, who's just kind of interested in the question of should I eat beef or not. And so for me, I could talk about this for hours, right? So it's trying to distill it down to so Russ Conser, who's another friend of ours, who's very involved in the regenerative grazing movement, says it's not the cow, it's the how. And I think we should have t-shirts I think there are some t-shirts. We should have more t-shirts for that. It's not the cow, it's the how. It's very simple, right? It's not every cow is bad. It's depends on the landscape and depends on if you let them run all over the place and they graze down all the species that you want. What did Ray Archuleta calls this, like ice cream grass. They're going to eat all the ice cream grass. And I'm trying to this is literally how I explain it to city friends at the dinner table. Like they will eat all the ice cream grass and then they'll trample things and then there will be no more grass. But if you manage them intelligently and intentionally by bunching them in different concentrated corrals or paddocks and move them around, then you think about it, you're concentrating all the manure and the fertilizer in one place where you want it. And then you're letting the other 90% of the land rest and recover. And so that just makes intuitive sense to someone. We're like, okay, well, if you're concentrating the impact on one place, the rest of the land has time to recover. And so at the end of the day, you end up with a much healthier landscape. And that's sucking down carbon from the air, putting that below the soil. And so think about trees. Everyone kind of knows that forests sequester carbon. Most environmentalists know that, right? Like forests are sucking carbon. All right. You're just thinking about the grassland as one really, really vast flat forest. And they can sequester a ton of carbon as well. And 1/3 of the world's landmass is grasslands. So without getting into the nitty gritty of all the fascinating stuff of like microbes and fungal bacteria pathways, it's just, look, we're sucking a lot of the bad greenhouse gas and putting them in. And then, you know, people like Ray Archuleta, some real scientists will probably take issue with that, right? Because they're like, no, it's a carbon cycle. But often that's too complicated for someone who just wanted a 30-second answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think being able to speak the language of normal people is a huge talent. Engineers are notorious for not. Yeah, the engineers are notorious for not being able to explain it, and so I think they need this translator. And so I like the way you describe it. It makes perfect sense to me. Well, speaking of going into the details, are there any books that you've read that have been impactful in your thinking on this subject? Books that you would recommend that other people read if they really want to get into details?
Depends on whether. I'm like looking at my bookshelf now. Books that I would recommend to producers who want to learn this versus kind of the more casual people who are just interested in land management. So in terms of for the casual people, I always recommend Nicolette Hahn Nyman's Defending Beef for anyone who's interested in just like, hey, are cows good or bad for the planet? There's also Judy Schwartz's Cows Save the Planet. Anything by Joel Salatin, basically. For the foodies who are interested in how nature relates to food, Dan Barber's The Third Plate. And then David Montgomery's books on soil are fantastic. And then for producers, there's just a ton of much more in-depth resources. The Alan Savory's Holistic Management Handbook is kind of the Bible for how to begin doing that. But then Alan Williams' books, Before You Have a Cow, are also really excellent. I could probably go on for a while.
No, this is awesome. That's great. I'll make sure to put all those on the website because the more books the better. That's perfect. So when you show up at a ranch and you are trying to convince a rancher who's been ranching their way for 40 years to switch over to your application, what is the sales pitch there? How do you do that? Because I know that, as you know, and I know, ranchers there's kind of an insular community, and they don't take kindly to outsiders sometimes. Mm-hmm. So how do you break through that to get them to fully understand what you're doing and adopt this technology?
I don't believe in sales pitches,
mm-hmm.
Ed. So I think that the most successful businesses are the ones who are solving a real problem for a group of people. So it's rather, for us, we think about it as trying to find the people who are looking for us. Because when we built PastureMap to begin with, and we built it in partnership with 30 producers who are serious grazing managers. And so if you're a serious grazing manager, you're probably thinking all the time about where your grass is, how it's doing. You're checking it every day. And if your property's big, then it's time management. It's how do I get around to all of these multiple lease properties? How do I make sure that my interns and my staff are trained up to visualize the landscape and look at it and be able to assess it the way that I can? And so we're looking for people who have that problem, and not necessarily trying to change the minds of someone who wants to manage differently. I don't really believe in a product being able to change somebody's mindset. I think there's a really exciting movement of people who are becoming more and more excited about grazing for soil health. And when they get into it, it often is overwhelming. The amount of, I just rattled off like 10 books. It's like a lot of information, a lot of knowledge once you start thinking about things in this mindset of ecosystem management. You have to think about the soil, you have to think about the microbes, the wildlife, and the cattle, and mainly you're just like trying to make sure that they have water out there. And this having all of these gurus who are teaching really sophisticated grazing management, like Alan Williams, like Jim Garish, like Alan Savory, that is a really complex, whole new system than what people are used to doing. And so we're looking for the folks who are either already doing that or are making that transition and are finding it like, oh my gosh, I now have 10x more things to think about, and I could use a tool to help me keep track of everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you think about cattle ranching just as a business, just without considering anything else, it's a tough business. And so, the idea of somebody trying to switch everything up at once. That's doesn't make much sense. So I think that's a great approach. Do you have any success stories, like from some of your clients or your users who have adopted the use of your technology and how it's kind of transformed their operations?
Yeah, sure. I can list a few. So Brian Alexander is one of our first customers. He's been using PastureMap for 3 years now. He's out in southern Kansas on the Kansas-Oklahoma border, and he uses it to keep track of his forage inventory on 6,000 to 7,000 acres, because he's like one guy managing that whole operation, and being able to check every day on what he thought the pasture inventory was last time he drove through a piece without having to go back there and eyeball it again and pull up the photos helps him be able to plan out where he's going to do his moves and how many stocking days there are in that place. So it helps him be able to get his arms around that whole property that he has inherited from his dad and took over a few years ago. And then he recently, 2 years ago, he was in the Anderson Creek wildfire, and unfortunately, all 100% of his pastures burned. And with the recovery efforts, he was able to get back on his feet faster because he was tracking the forage as it came back on each of those pastures, which, as you know, is super critical at a time like that when you basically have no stockpile left. Another customer of ours, Joe Morris, who is ranching out in San Benito Valley, contract grazes for 3 separate properties, and he's got a team of 3 ranch hands who manage each of those properties. And he used to have to have them come in at like really early in the morning at his house, which is his HQ, and everybody get around a grazing chart. But now with PastureMap, he's planned out the next moves for all 3 of those properties, and so people can just go straight to the property that they're managing and know which moves they're supposed to be doing. And then Joe can be on his home property and know that that's all happening. And we thought, that's really helpful for Joe, but I think it's also appreciated by the ranch hands not having to drive out another extra half hour early in the morning to figure out the game plan. And they've said that they appreciate being able to hand their phone or their iPad over to an irrigation guy, or somebody who comes on for just one day, like high school interns who are here to dig for pipeline or something, and just being able to hand a digital map that shows where you are and where all the infrastructure is to a new person who's not familiar with your land saves them having to stand around for half a day and guide them, right? So then they can just hand that to the new staff member, and then they can go off and check cows and repair fence and do all the other important things they have to do. So we realized, like, we thought it was grazing management software, but we're finding that a lot of our customers are using PastureMap for just team management, freeing up time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when you were saying that, is that it almost seems like, have you ever measured or done a survey on how many hours this saves ranchers? Because it seems like it would save, if you add up everybody in the team, it could save hundreds of hours a month. Yeah.
We haven't measured it, but we keep hearing anecdotes like this, and we'll put more case studies.
Yeah, that's really cool. Because like with anything, time is the most valuable commodity. So that's right. That's really cool. So where do you see PastureMap evolving in the next 5 years? If you were to, when you're thinking about how this business is going to grow and evolve, what do you think? What are your goals?
Yeah. We are hearing more requests from our customers to help them, not just with record keeping and mapping, but with active planning. So in 2018, we're going to launch the grazing planning chart, the chart that I talk about seeing a lot on people's barn walls. We're going to make a digital version of that to make it easier for people to plan and replan when things like fire or drought or other extreme events happen. Often what we hear is folks will plan the season ahead of time on a chart, but then that only lasts as long as the first rain, right? And then then you've got high ground, low ground, you've got stuff that's muddy, you have to change your plan around, and then by the time you're just like fighting fires at that point. So people rarely ever get back to replanning during the season, but there's huge benefits to being able to be flexible during your season and also still have a plan. So a digital plan can do that a lot better than a piece of paper. So we're excited about launching that in 2018. And then we're also working on a conservation innovation grant that pulls in soil data. Because there are thousands of ranchers who now have sent off their own soil samples or have biologists come out and do their soil data measurement. But so far, there's only been very few carbon credits given to ranchers for their active management of grasslands. And so we want to help be the verification platform that helps ranchers capture that data and share that with the verification agencies. So in the next 5 years, the 5-year vision would be that ranchers are being paid not only for the cattle that they raise, but also for their grassland management activities. And that can come in the form of soil carbon credits. It can also come in the form of ecosystem management. A lot of our ranchers do plan their rotations with regard to wildlife habitat and mating seasons and stuff like that. That should all get recorded so that they get credit for it, not just to be allowed to graze on like a conservation property, but they should actually be paid for ecosystem services. And I think that's a mindset that the environmental world hasn't come around to yet. Is like it's not a scarcity mindset; it should be an abundance mindset of rewarding ranchers for the multiple services that they do on the land. A third kind of big strategic push for us is enabling the sharing of all of this information. So right now you can share the information with your team and with consultants, but on an aggregate level, there should be insights that you can find out as a new farmer rancher, coming back to this generational transition. If you are coming onto a new piece of property, you should be able to log on a pasture map. Right now, you can already view what kind of soil types you have on the land on pasture map, but you should also be able to see on aggregate in your region without seeing individual farmers or ranchers, like what are people's stocking rates? How many AUM or how many animal days per acre are similar soil types, and what are the rainfall patterns in your region? And then I would love to get to a point where young farmers and ranchers can then reach out to other ranchers in their region who are using PastureMap, have experience, and can share that information. But that has to be an opt-in if they want to be contacted and if they want to mentor the next generation. But like give them the same data like basis to talk and share a similar language when they look at a piece of land.
Very cool. The second point you were making about the being able to record the conservation aspects of the properties here in Colorado, I do a lot of work with conservation easements, and the value of a conservation easement is measured by the value of the property, which is basically a product of the development potential. Yet when you see these ranches out in eastern Montana or eastern Colorado that are in the middle of nowhere, but they are there's really no development potential, but there's a lot of conservation value. I think a tool like yours could be really helpful in helping to value those easements on something other than the development potential, if that makes any sense.
I agree. Yeah.
That's very cool. I'm glad to hear you're doing all that. So I want to hear more about you personally, because I know you've got a very, very interesting backstory and very high achieving backstory. Where did you grow up?
I actually grew up all over the place.
Did you really?
I went to 14 different schools growing up.
Did you really? Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My dad was an entrepreneur also, and he did. So I'm Chinese American, and he did an import-export business between China and the U.S. in the 80s, where he was basically trying to recycle waste paper. Mm-hmm. And he was setting up box plants in China to recycle waste paper and then sell it back out as cardboard boxes. And so we traveled a lot back and forth between Taiwan, Hong Kong, California. And later on, he got bitten by the environmental bug and basically tried to set up reforestation as part of that, trying to build like a eco-friendly business in China with local governments, and got into wind and solar and basically trying to help factories reduce their emissions by installing wind and solar and then selling those credits. under the Kyoto Protocol so like the very early first version of credits. So you can see the apple doesn't fall that far from the tree.
Well, that was one of my questions was
yeah.
How did you get interested in entrepreneurship? And this is the answer.
Yeah. I mean, kids are always so self-centered, right? So I didn't really put it all together until I was like well on my journey to starting Pasture Map, and I was like, oh, this is actually a lot like what Dad does.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So you grew up all over. You went to Stanford. Did you, when you went to Stanford, did you have the goal of being an entrepreneur in your mind, or did that come later?
No, I didn't. It's kind of, I had this image in my head of what startup entrepreneurs are like. And I was like, oh, they're all these, teenage kids with hoodies. Like they're probably dudes. They're coders. I'm not a coder. I was a history major and a poli-sci major. And I was like, I like to think about big global problems. I'm not one of these egotistical founder types. And I think that's a point I want to make on visibility. It's if there are women out there listening to your podcast, like I think visibility was super important to me. Coming back to grad school, in between, I had seen more. The community here in the Bay Area is starting to realize they really have a gender and diversity problem, and so they're trying to do more on inviting women, people of color, like people who don't look like your traditional Silicon Valley entrepreneur type to speak. And for me, that was like the first time I saw someone who was like me, who came from a business background, who like is not particularly it's not about hanging my shingle with my name on it. It's about, there's this problem and I know that I have something that I can contribute to this community that I really care about. That was really helpful in me realizing that I could potentially call myself an entrepreneur.
That's really neat. What has been the biggest surprise in your journey in entrepreneurship? I mean, I know everybody has big plans, and I'm sure you had a very detailed business plan written out, but when you were from when you had this thing in your head as an idea until the reality of it now, what has been the biggest surprise overall in the whole process? I
think the whole process is just very humbling. It's like the more if you're doing it right, you learn every week how much you don't know. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I knew that coming in as, not having grown up on ranch, I don't have the 30 years of experience that some of my teammates do being ranch managers. And so like building Pasture Map to be something that producers will use requires us to just spend a lot of time with producers and following them around and making sure that we watch them use it and not being prescriptive with what we think. So that's why I've been very hesitant. Even this 5-year plan, it's taken me 4 years to get to a point where I feel even comfortable recommending something to a producer, because they always know their land better. Yes. And they always know what's going on better than I do. So on that level, I think that's part of our company DNA that has helped us with success, because I don't think producers feel like Pasture Map's trying to tell them what to do. I think people feel like it's a tool that helps them capture their own knowledge. And on the building a company side, there's just so much. I didn't know how to do sales. I still don't know how to do marketing. I didn't know how to build an engineering team. It's for those who are curious about learning like new stuff. I think farming and ranching is definitely one of those professions where you're always a beginner and you're always in awe of nature. I think entrepreneurship of any type is also like that.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, because I was thinking ranching is a really tough business that requires constant learning, constant hard work, and then startups are the exact same thing, a really, really tough business. And so you've kind of combined the two toughest things, and you're making a great go of it. So I admire that. Very impressive.
Appreciate it.
So, you went to Stanford, you worked for McKinsey, you did private equity, if I'm correct on that. I mean, you have this really, really stellar resume, and I feel like that would have set you in a position where you could have started a startup in any sector of business. You've kind of alluded to this already in conversation, but why did you choose agriculture over, say something like Uber or something like that? Is it because because of your connection to agriculture and food?
Yeah, it's personal.
Yeah.
I mean, I said before, I owe a debt of gratitude to farmers and ranchers for producing food that I can eat, that doesn't make me break out in hives. But also, I mean, in terms of food, I feel like food is at the intersection of everything that matters to me, like emotionally, and also like where people sit down and share. Food is such a deeply connected. It's a connector for families, for societies, for communities, and the people who produce our food are often not recognized in that. I think that's not the case increasingly now. Like we're beginning to recognize and honor the people who produce our food, but I still think we need more of that. And in terms of agriculture, there is no bigger sector in the world that is important for us to figure out than how to produce food for everybody on the planet in a way that honors the environment, and makes sure that we have planet Earth for future generations. And so, like when I thought about the many different interesting companies that you could join, it was always about, let's do something in food, because if we don't figure this out, we're all screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I realized from going to grazing conferences just how much carbon can be sequestered, and how much I was looking for that win-win-win. And to me, adaptive grazing management and empowering ranchers to do that is a win-win-win for the planet, for the people, for their own profitability, for carbon sequestration, and it's just such a hopeful message. And it's something that feels bigger than me. Like going back to not spending time on the ego part of it, it feels like this movement to bring adaptive regenerative grazing to manage millions and millions of acres around the world better, create more profitable livelihoods for the next generation of producers, and restore the environment, and in the process produce meat that is better for you and nutrient dense. Like that's just a win-win-win. Like I can't think of anything I would rather put the rest of my lifetime and the rest of my career into than helping support this movement with the heroes, the people who have already been pioneers of that movement. I just have so much respect for that audacious vision.
You need to get on the public speaking circuit. Now I'm all hyped up and excited. You're really good at that.
Thanks.
So when you look at agriculture and you look at entrepreneurship and business, do you have any heroes or role models, and they could be alive or dead, just people you admire in either sector that, not so much that you model yourself after, but just people that you think about and admire and think other people should know more about?
Yeah. I mean, obviously a lot of people look up to Joel Salatin. I think for me, my personal mentor is Dr. Alan Williams. He's a beef nutritionist who has really done a ton of work on education around adaptive grazing for both the animal performance and for grasslands. And I met him at the Grass-Fed Exchange conference, which was one of the first conferences I ever went to. And I was scared going into the ranching world. You know, I was like, okay, there's a sea of really big belt buckles and big hats and beard, and I'm just this Asian woman, right, who shows up there, and people are like, "Are you lost? You know, where were you trying to be?" And I met Dr. Alan Williams, and also Todd Churchill and Russ Conser, Wayne Rasmussen, some of the members of the committee at the Grass-Fed Exchange at that first conference, and they were just Will Winter, just people who have spent their lives. You know, they're a generation older than me. They spent their lives building this movement, and their whole reason for doing it is just to help fellow producers. And they really welcomed me with open arms and welcomed me into the community. And so I feel like I owe a lot of gratitude to them, and I just continue to be in such admiration for the work that they do for their community.
Well, if you showed them even like 10% of the passion that you're showing me for the movement, I can understand why they were so excited. What about just straight up business? Doesn't have anything to do with agriculture. Any entrepreneurs or business people that you admire?
Yeah. Let's see. One of the ones I most admire is the founder of Zen Payroll, which the name of that company is now Gusto.
Yeah, I know that company.
Yeah, you know that company? Yeah. So Josh is just a very humble founder. And I've heard him speak a couple of times and have taken some of his mantras to heart about building a team culture but he frequently talks about that company as how do you build the kind of company that you want to spend the rest of your life running? And I really appreciate that long-term mindset in Silicon Valley where things are so boom or bust. I think that's rare. And then he also spends a lot of time coaching his team on don't do heroics. Heroics don't scale. Which for me is pretty important because I came from a pretty like fast-paced, one might say cutthroat business world where you're expected to just grind. And part of building your own company is you get to build your own culture. And building the kind of culture and trying to be the kind of manager that I would have wanted to have manage me, where you care about their personal health and wellness, and you care about them learning and trying to actively coach. Because like strong performers are always going to try to impress you by overworking themselves, and to have a manager say, hey, you should slow down, and this is a marathon, not a sprint. Heroics don't scale. You could probably pull an all-nighter for 2 days, and then like after that, I'm not going to get anything out from you anymore because you're going to be burnt out. I think for young people, and because we're a startup, we hire a lot of fresh grads. For young people, that's really important. Like that's the kind of mentorship that I wished I had when I was in my 20s. So I try to role model myself after other successful founders who are building that kind of culture.
That's refreshing to hear, especially in the world that the startup world that you're operating in. So you've worked with ranchers, and you've visited and worked on farms and agricultural operations all over the world, and you work so closely with all these people. Are there any kind of overarching life lessons that you've learned from working with the ranchers and farmers that you could share with us?
Yeah, I learn from them all the time. I think for me, it's the taking the long view, and I just talked about slowing down. That's advice that I often should take for myself as well. When you're talking to a producer whose family has been stewarding some land for 6 generations, or someone who's just a new producer who's come in and has fallen in love with this landscape and wants to know the history and wants to steward it, they take the long view, right? So things don't have to be like urgent. You don't have to fix every single thing immediately. And I think taking that inner calmness and perspective on how do we want, and this is something that I've learned from both Native Hawaiian producers as well as Native American producers here as well. It's like you're thinking about this land on like 1,000-year scale, and Maori producers in New Zealand think about they have steward their land on they have a 500-year plan. Wow. For stewarding the land that they've gotten returned to them. And that's just that kind of perspective really quiets you and humbles you on how do you build things with intentionality towards that kind of time scale. And then relationships also on that longer time frame. One of my mentors says you should treat people, everyone you meet in the business world or in your as if you're going to know each other forever, which in this day and age is true. You're going to know people forever. So I think having that perspective helps me align my actions a lot more with there often isn't a trade-off when I think you want something, you want to make a sale or you want to land this partnership. And I think when you shorten incentives, this is going to get philosophical to like.
No, I like philosophical.
Like the whole world right now, which I think like the business world typically is operating on short-term incentives. Our extraction of resources, our consumers, like it's all based on short-term incentives and short-term gains. But when you spread things out, when you smooth out to like 1,000-year time scale, or maybe that's too much to expect, but like a seventh generation, right? At that kind of time scale, then what the right thing to do is becomes much more clear.
I agree with all that. Very, very well put. You should write a book. You ever thought about that?
After we execute our 5-year plan.
Yeah.
Maybe it should be a 50-year plan.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I've got some kind of quick questions that I've asked of everybody that I've had on the podcast, and it's pretty cool to hear all the different answers and compare and contrast. So I'd like to run through those with you real quick, and then I'll let you get back to your important stuff, more important than talking to me. Do you have any favorite books related to the American West, or really any subject? It doesn't have to be agriculture or business. Just, are there any books that have been impactful in your life? You've mentioned a ton already.
One of my favorite books related to the West is Angle of Repose.
My wife just finished that and loved it.
Oh, so good. Yeah. Anything by Wendell Berry. Angle of Repose. Anything by Wendell Berry. Oh, I need to put in a plug for the favorite book I read this year was Lentil Underground by Liz Carlisle. And it's about a bunch of producers in Montana that started growing lentils.
Cool. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's about this like underground, grassroots movement to build soil health in Montana. Very
interesting. Yeah, well, I'll look that one up. Do you have any favorite documentaries or films?
I'm not a big film buff. But I really like Wong Kar-wai, which is a Cantonese. He's a Cantonese film producer that produces like pretty evocative cinematography. One of his most famous films is In the Mood for Love, and that's his cinematography was the inspiration for the way that Moonlight was filmed. They had a big influence on. If you've seen Moonlight,
oh, cool,
yeah.
Very cool. I just saw a series of short documentaries on Netflix. I've only watched one of them, but I think it's called Rotten, and it's about the food industry. And the first one I watched was about the honey industry and how a huge amount of honey is counterfeit honey, and it's not real honey. It's just fake sweetened stuff that gets shipped in from other countries. And I had no idea about any of it, but they're like 45 minutes each. So it's, if you have Netflix, you might enjoy that. It was pretty cool.
I will check that out.
So you've got a lot going on. Obviously you're working as hard as you can. You've got all the businesses going. Are there any, hobbies or activities you enjoy that may be surprising to the listener? Actually, no, what are your normal hobbies? Yeah, what do? You run?
I cook a lot. I run, I cook. I usually have a freezer full of beef and lamb from our friends.
Cool.
Our company actually rotates buying quarters and halves from all the different producers in our area.
You do anything funny?
Do anything funny? I like jumping in really cold water.
Me too.
Really? I'm part of this club in the Bay Area called the Dolphin Club of these crazy people who like swimming in the bay without wetsuits.
Oh my gosh. I was just there and went surfing a few weeks ago, and I couldn't imagine getting in that water. I mean, my hands went numb, and I was wearing a wetsuit.
Just like, okay, so you see everybody under 40 is wearing a wetsuit, but then you go in this club. My club is mostly 80-year-olds, and so when you see an 80-year-old who's getting in there in a Speedo and a swim cap, and they just give you this withering look, you're like, okay, I can't be a. I actually that's kind of normal for me because I feel like I spend a lot of my time out in nature following older people.
Yeah. They're tough. Yeah, the cold water stuff. I love the cold water. I take a cold shower every day.
It's one of the best things for you.
It really is.
Yeah.
I could talk about that all day too. So with all the time you spent outdoors and on these ranches, is there any, and farms, is there any experience that comes to mind as being one of the most memorable or most powerful experiences you've had in the outdoors? And it could be a funny experience, a scary experience, just a cool experience.
I'm going to tell a funny one and a memorable one. So The first time I've driven through several Midwest storms now, and they're terrifying to me from the Bay Area, right? So I'd just gotten done at Gabe and Paul Brown's place, and I was driving across North Dakota into the Canadian border, and Paul Brown, who's Gabe's son, was like, in the summers, we get 60-mile-an-hour hail, and sometimes they're the size of a tennis ball, and sometimes the tornadoes come with them. And I was like, "You're totally pulling my. That doesn't happen. What are you talking about?" And I was listening to the radio, and the tornado warning came on, and was like, said that there was a tornado warning and a summer storm coming up behind me, moving at 60 miles an hour, and I was moving at about 60 miles an hour, and it was coming up right behind me. It was terrible. And then the hail started, and I just got so freaked out. I tried to drive to the nearest thing that looked like a barn, which was a couple miles away, and I ended up in a ditch.
Wow.
So I was prepared. I mean, I was protected from the hail for an hour, but I was also in a ditch. And then it was sunset, and then I hiked out a couple miles, and some of the neighbors came and dragged me out with their truck, which was pretty funny. And they were like, "Did you intend to drive into the ditch?" I was like, "I'm sorry, I'm from the West Coast." But the other thing that happened on that trip was I got to wake up in prairie that was so alive, both on Gabe Brown's place and Paul's place, and also I was driving up to Neil Dennis's place in Saskatchewan, and I've just never been part of a landscape that, like, the whole thing is a living, breathing, ringing organism where I was woken up at 4 a.m. because the birds were so loud. And then when we we drove out into the prairie, and you've just got like clouds of crickets and clouds of different like butterflies and all kinds of things bouncing up in front of the four-wheeler, and the cacophony of like how much they were making noise, the ringing. It's like the whole prairie was singing, and it was just this. It was a pretty all of nature moment. I can't really describe it, but it was life changing. That was when I'd already built. It was already 3 years into building Pasture Map at that point, but I hadn't internalized what it means to bring a prairie back to life.
Very cool. That's very cool. Where is your favorite location in the West? If you can pick one, that's a hard question.
Super hard.
Yeah. I don't know how I'd answer that. Somebody asked me one of these questions the other day when we were recording, and I was like stumbling and I didn't know the answer. So
I don't have a favorite, but it's anywhere that has grasslands where I can get down and kind of be crawling in the grass and looking at the different insects and looking at the soil and digging around on dung, so that's pretty much any day that I get to drive out and visit a producer and get out onto the land with them, hopefully with some mountains in the back. That's any one of those places makes me really happy.
Cool. And what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? That's another hard one.
I think the best piece of advice, of business advice I've received was from my mentor, who is my professor. She said, treat people like you're going to know them forever. That's
very good. Very, very good. So last big question, if you could make a request of the people listening to this podcast, or offer some advice or impart some words of wisdom to the people listening who love the American West in one way or another, what would that be?
Share your love of the West, share your love of the land. I think that, having grown up outside of this world and coming into it, it was intimidating to get into this world, and the fact that I was welcomed with open arms, and welcomed, and people made space for me to develop my own love for the land, and that's something that's pretty rare because a lot of people these days in cities don't really have that much access to open spaces. So share that as much as you can. We all deserve to build a relationship with the land.
That's great. So how can people connect with you and learn more about Pasture Map? Where should they look online?
www.pasturemap.com.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome. I'm very, very excited about this, and I can't wait to see how it continues to evolve.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, and or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.